Hello and welcome, dear listeners of Sci-fi Stories. We truly appreciate your continued presence and support. Recently, our channel lost its monetization on YouTube, leaving us with absolutely zero budget to operate. If you find today's story entertaining, please consider supporting us with just $1. Your contribution provides the essential funds to pay our hardworking staff, helping them cover living expenses and continue creating amazing content for you. You can donate by scanning the PayPal QR code on your screen or by clicking the link in the video description or pinned comment. Let us dive into the story. Send us anything. We are getting slaughtered. The Supreme Commander of the Kalan Empire pleaded into the cosmic void. His voice, breaking as yet another star system, vanished into a blinding, silent light. The mighty Kalan, conquerors of 1,000 worlds, were facing absolute erasure. They begged the universe for a monster, a weapon of unimaginable cruelty. Instead, humanity sent them a dying man in a wrinkled suit. The pride of the Kalan Empire was shattering, not under the weight of fire or steel, but under the crushing force of absolute, flawless perfection. A mysterious and unstoppable hostile entity, known only as the Prism, had breached their galactic borders. It did not conquer. It crystallized. The core planets of the Empire, once bustling with billions of souls, were being transformed into massive, silent monuments of eternal crystal. The Prism did not bring death. It brought an agonizingly beautiful stasis. Billions of lives were locked in an endless suspension of time, their bodies turned into translucent statues, their minds trapped forever in a single, unchanging microsecond. Every desperate counterattack launched by the mighty Kalan Armada had failed entirely. They fired their most advanced dark matter torpedoes and singularity cannons, weapons capable of cracking moons in half. But the radiant light waves emanating from the Prism simply rippled, catching the kinetic and thermal energy of the Kalan weapons and reflecting them back as harmless, scattered rainbows. There was no brute force capable of scratching a surface that absorbed and perfected everything it touched. Inside the heavily shielded war room of the Kalan flagship, Supreme Commander Vile stared at the holographic tactical map. 7 of their 12 core worlds had been swallowed by the blinding light in just 4 days. The casualty rate was practically 100% for any fleet that engaged the enemy, swallowing his immense pride and centuries of xenophobic tradition. Vile ordered his communications officers to bypass all encryption protocols. He broadcasted a naked, desperate plea for salvation across the entire galaxy, aiming the heavy transmitters directly toward the quarantined, chaotic sectors of space belonging to humanity. This is the Kalan High Command. We are facing an extinction-level anomaly. Our weapons are useless. Send us anything you have. We are getting slaughtered. For exactly 8 agonizing hours, the void offered nothing but static. Then, a singular, highly compressed data packet pierced through the jamming frequencies. The message from Earth was painfully brief, devoid of any diplomatic grandstanding or tactical inquiries. It read, "Information received. We are deploying a single star." A wave of frantic, terrifying hope swept through the Kalan bridge. A star. To the literal and methodical minds of the Kalan, humanity was promising a superweapon of astronomical proportions. They envisioned a mobile Dyson sphere, a flying fortress capable of harnessing the power of a collapsing sun, or perhaps a reality-bending bomb that could shatter the very fabric of space and time. Vile immediately ordered the remnants of his battered fleet to form a massive, ceremonial vanguard around their largest spatial tear gateway. 2,000 heavily armored dreadnoughts lined up, their crews holding their breath, ready to escort the human god of war to the front line. The spatial tear sensors shrieked, indicating an incoming jump. The tear gateway spun, flashing with violet energy. The Kalan officers braced themselves for the arrival of a Titan. Space ripped open, spitting out a vessel that immediately caused the tactical scanners to glitch in confusion. It was not a fortress. It was a rusted, archaic human transport freighter that looked at least 50 years out of date. It possessed absolutely zero offensive armaments. The hull was battered, scorched by countless atmospheric reentries, and one of its thrusters was violently venting black plasma into the void. Its engine signals were completely chaotic, screaming a mechanical death rattle as the ship limped awkwardly toward the Kalan flagship. Silence fell over the alien command center. Perhaps, they thought, this pathetic vessel was merely the herald. Perhaps the weapon was stored inside. The freighter clumsily attached itself to the flagship docking bay. Commander Vial and his elite guard rushed to the airlock. The heavy pressurized doors hissed open with a grinding, metallic shriek. The steam cleared, revealing the interior of a dimly lit, foul-smelling cargo hold. There was no machine of war. There was only Archer Austin. He stepped out of the shadows, dragging his feet across the polished floor of the Kalan hangar. Archer was a severely underweight, sickly-looking human male. He wore a faded, gray business suit that was deeply wrinkled and stained near the lapels. His pale face was covered in a layer of cold sweat. In his right hand, he gripped the handle of a heavy, lead-lined briefcase. He took 2 steps down the ramp, suddenly stopped, and collapsed against the handrail. A violent, rattling cough tore through his frail chest. He pulled a crumpled cloth from his pocket, wiped a thick streak of dark blood from his mouth, and looked up at the towering alien commanders with exhausted, bloodshot eyes. Supreme Commander Vial felt the last fragile thread of hope snap, plunging him instantly into the darkest abyss of despair. Humanity was not trying to save them. Humanity, in its infinitely cruel and twisted sense of humor, was mocking their final, pathetic moments by sending them a man who was already dying. The pristine, sterilized medical drones of the Kalan flagship hovered around the coughing human, extending their glowing diagnostic tendrils. The chief medical officer, a tall being of flawless posture and shimmering silver skin, stared in absolute horror at the biometric readouts floating in the air. The human was operating on less than 30% lung capacity. His cellular structure was actively degrading, ravaged by an aggressive, undocumented radiation sickness that defied all Kalan biological understanding. As the alien doctor moved forward to administer a standardized cellular regeneration serum, Archer Austin violently swatted the glowing syringe away. "Keep your perfect medicine away from me," Archer rasped, his voice sounding like dry leaves grinding over broken glass. He leaned heavily against the polished chrome wall, his chest heaving with every labored breath. "Human, your biological systems are in a state of catastrophic collapse," the medical officer stated, genuinely baffled by the frail creature's stubbornness. "You will expire in less than 48 hours without immediate medical intervention." Archer let out a wet, rattling chuckle that quickly devolved into another brutal coughing fit. "My decay is not a flaw, Doctor. It is a strictly necessary fine-tuning for this entire operation. Do not fix what is intentionally broken." Supreme Commander Vale watched this exchange with a heavy, sinking feeling in his primary hearts. Time was slipping away. He gestured for Archer to follow him to the Central Command holotable. A massive, 3-dimensional projection of the galaxy flickered to life, showing the creeping, blinding white borders of the prism actively consuming 3 more star systems. Vial began to explain their defensive perimeters and fleet formations, hoping the human possessed some latent, unorthodox strategic genius hidden beneath his sickly exterior. Archer did not even glance at the illuminated map. "I do not care about your troop movements or your energy shields," Archer interrupted, his weary eyes scanning the ceiling of the bridge. "I need unrestricted access to your central climate control systems and the primary life support aqueous vats. Right now." The command deck fell into a stunned, offended silence. To surrender control of the lifeblood of a station housing hundreds of thousands of refugees to a sick, unpredictable primate was unthinkable. Yet, the overwhelming dread of the prism forced Vale to give a slow nod. The heavy blast doors to the environmental engineering deck hissed open. The environmental deck was a masterpiece of Kalan engineering. Towering, transparent columns of highly purified water and meticulously filtered air hummed with a soothing, rhythmic perfection. Everything was clean, ordered, and mathematically flawless. Archer dragged his heavy, lead-lined briefcase to the central intake manifold. He punched in the override codes Vial had provided, opening the sterile filtration chambers to the open air. With a trembling hand, Archer clicked open the heavy latches of his briefcase. The Kalan observers instinctively recoiled as a putrid, overpowering stench filled the pristine room. It smelled of rotting vegetation, ancient stagnant earth, and violent chemical reactions. Inside the case were dozens of thick glass vials filled with bubbling, dark, organic sludge. Without a word of explanation, Archer began unstopping the vials and pouring their chaotic, foul contents directly into the station's primary air and water supply. "What are you doing?" a chief engineer screamed, rushing forward as the pure, blue water in the vats turned a sickly, murky brown. "You are poisoning the entire sector. You will kill us all." "I am saving your sterile lives," Archer muttered softly, sealing the empty vials back into his case. Before the Kalan guards could physically restrain the human, the station's red alert klaxons began to blare. A deafening siren echoed through the metallic corridors. On the main viewing screens, a horrifying sight materialized out of the dark void. A Kalan scout ship, one of their own reconnaissance vessels, was drifting uncontrollably toward the refugee station's main hangar. But the ship was no longer made of dark metal. 90% of its hull had been converted into the blinding, flawless crystal of the prism. It was practically glowing with the enemy's infectious light, bringing the eternal stasis directly to their fragile doorstep. "Target that vessel!" Vale roared, absolute panic gripping his throat. "Fire all perimeter cannons. Disintegrate it before the light touches our outer hull." "The targeting arrays are entirely jammed," a tactical officer shouted back in terror. "The crystalline refraction is blinding our sensors. We cannot lock on. Impact in exactly 60 seconds. Death was imminent." The crystal light began to lick the exterior shields of the station, turning the robust energy barriers into brittle glass. Suddenly, Archer slammed his pale palm onto the main ventilation console. He bypassed the safety regulators and violently reversed the airflow of the entire hangar bay, blowing the station's internal atmosphere outward into the vacuum, instead of invisible, odorless oxygen. A thick, violently churning fog erupted from the massive exterior ventilation shafts. It was a dense cloud born from the organic compounds Archer had just unleashed into the system, teeming with billions of chaotic, rapidly mutating fungal spores from the darkest, most untamed corners of Earth. The dark, murky mist billowed violently into the cold vacuum of space, defying the clean aesthetics of Kalan engineering. It swirled without rhythm, entirely engulfing the approaching crystal scout ship in a suffocating embrace of biological noise. It was an ugly, profoundly disorganized, and completely asymmetrical defense mechanism. The Kalan command staff watched the main view screen in breathless, paralyzed terror as the blinding, perfect light of the prism collided directly with the chaotic human fog. Then, the utterly impossible happened before their wide eyes. The pure, stasis-inducing light did not freeze the organic matter. Instead, as the radiant energy tried to process the infinite, unpredictable genetic mutations and the sheer microscopic chaos of the earth fungus, it began to stutter. The light fractured. It bent at impossible angles, twisted upon itself, and finally shattered into millions of harmless, fading sparks like brittle glass, crushed under a heavy boot. The crystalline infection covering the scout ship violently receded, peeling back from the titanium hull as if the perfection itself was burning in agony. The hostile light flickered, panicked, and died, leaving the scout ship battered, deeply scarred, but entirely free from the eternal stasis. For the first time in the long, bloody history of this one-sided galactic war, the flawless, unstoppable enemy had been decisively forced to retreat. A stunned, absolute silence washed over the vast command deck. The Kalen officers stared at the viewscreen, unable to comprehend the messy, illogical victory that had just unfolded. Archer leaned heavily against the climate control console, his frail body trembling severely from the physical exertion. He pulled his crumpled cloth from his pocket and slowly wiped a fresh streak of dark blood from the corner of his mouth. He looked up at Supreme Commander Vale, his pale, sweat-drenched face stretching into a weary, triumphant smile. "The prism feeds on absolute perfection," Archer explained, his voice a harsh, grounding whisper echoing in the quiet room. "It seeks utter order. It conquers by bringing ultimate mathematical harmony to everything it touches. Therefore, the greatest weapon humanity could ever send you is our absolute, unpredictable imperfection. We are a profound mess, Commander, and that is exactly what will kill them. Hello, and welcome. Dear listeners of Sci-fi Stories, we truly appreciate your continued presence and support. Recently, our channel lost its monetization on YouTube, leaving us with absolutely zero budget to operate. If you find today's story entertaining, please consider supporting us with just $1. Your contribution provides the essential funds to pay our hardworking staff, helping them cover living expenses and continue creating amazing content for you. You can donate by scanning the PayPal QR code on your screen, or by clicking the link in the video description or pinned comment. Let us dive into the story. The enemy possessed an intellect entirely devoid of ego, which meant it felt no frustration over its recent defeat. It simply analyzed the failure, discarded the ineffective vector of physical light, and instantly calculated a new angle of assimilation. The entity recognized that the biological quarantine erected by the human was a barrier of physical matter. Therefore, the next invasion would not be physical. It would be conceptual. Deep within the station, the proximity alarms remained completely silent. The environmental sensors registered 0 atmospheric anomalies. Yet, the temperature in the lower refugee decks plummeted. Frost crawling up the titanium bulkheads in intricate, fractal patterns. Out of the shadows, phasing through the solid walls as if matter were merely a suggestion, drifted the moderators. They were tall, slender entities constructed of hovering, disjointed crystalline prisms. They had no faces, no limbs, only geometric shapes rotating in a hypnotic, frictionless ballet. As they glided down the corridors, they did not attack. They sang. It was not a song of notes or chords. It was a singular, resonant frequency that bypassed auditory receptors entirely and vibrated directly into the neural pathways of any living creature nearby. It was the sound of absolute zero. It was the audio equivalent of a perfectly still pond, designed to synchronize the chaotic brainwaves of organic life and flatten them into a straight, eternal line. A squad of heavily armed Kalen security personnel charged down the hallway, raising their plasma rifles to intercept the ethereal intruders. But the moment the ghostly frequency washed over them, their assault collapsed. The soldiers did not scream. They did not fight. Their fingers loosened, letting their heavy weapons clatter onto the metal floor. The fierce, disciplined scowls on their alien faces melted away, replaced by expressions of terrifying, blank serenity. Their eyes glazed over, fixed on a beautiful emptiness. They froze mid-step, their bodies locking up as their minds were forcefully submerged into an ocean of peaceful nothingness. The song was a psychological virus, dragging them into an inescapable coma of perfect tranquility. The stasis wave rippled through the sector, freezing hundreds of Kalen in their tracks. It swept over the command deck, causing the tactical officers to slump over their consoles with terrifying smiles on their lips. Through this frozen gallery of enforced peace, a solitary, discordant figure kept moving. Archer Austin dragged his feet across the deck, his breath whistling sharply through his decaying lungs. The perfect frequency washed over him, attempting to soothe his neural pathways. But it found absolutely zero purchase. His mind was an absolute tempest of anxiety, pain, and fragmented thoughts. The crystalline song tried to impose order, but Archer was biologically and psychologically incapable of harmony. He was a walking manifestation of static. He stepped over the paralyzed bodies of the Kalen guards, casually walking directly into the path of the hovering moderators. The entities paused their rotation, their prisms clicking in confusion as they processed the anomaly of a mind that refused to be quieted. Archer reached the nearest internal communication terminal. He heaved his heavy, lead-lined briefcase onto the console, popped the latches, and flipped the lid open. There were no energy blasters inside. There were no explosive charges. Instead, nestled in the foam padding, lay a collection of antiquated 20th-century analog audio equipment. Thick spools of magnetic tape, heavy amplifiers patched together with frayed copper wires, and a row of glass vials swirling with highly aggressive, laboratory-mutated respiratory viruses from Earth. With trembling fingers, he hooked the analog outputs directly into the station's primary broadcast matrix. He did not bother with digital conversion. The raw, uncompressed electrical signals fed straight into the heavy public address speakers, lining every corridor of the massive refugee hub. "Let us see how you handle a little soul," Archer whispered to himself, his hand hovering over the heavy metal play button. He slammed it down. The station violently shuddered as the speakers erupted at maximum volume. It was a monstrous, unfiltered wall of auditory chaos, a compiled symphony of humanity at its most desperate and untamed. The recording began with the piercing, breathless wail of a newborn infant, immediately followed by the deafening, erratic screeching of subway train brakes grinding against rusted tracks. Layered beneath the urban noise was a frantic, entirely unscripted jazz saxophone solo, the notes clashing, bending, and breaking every known rule of musical theory. It was loud, it was ugly, and it was undeniably, painfully alive. Archer then shattered the glass vials of mutated viruses over the analog amplifiers. The caustic biological material seeped into the circuitry, causing the electrical signals to short out, sputter, and distort the audio feed even further, adding a layer of unpredictable static and sudden, violent volume spikes to the broadcast. The effect on the moderators was instantaneous and catastrophic. The absolute chaos of the human recording slammed into their perfect, single-frequency song. The entities could not synchronize with the unpredictable jazz. They could not process the irregular wailing. The audio waves acted like physical sledgehammers against their delicate, mathematical structure. The hovering prisms began to violently vibrate out of phase. A sharp, agonizing squeal echoed through the hallway as the central core of the lead moderator cracked. Jagged fissures spider-webbed across its flawless geometric face. The entity collapsed to the floor, convulsing as the chaotic sound waves literally tore its molecular bonds apart. From the deep fractures in its crystalline body, thick, glowing liquid began to leak. It was bleeding raw, red light, staining the deck plating as the entity melted into a puddle of broken glass and defeated energy. Down the corridor, the remaining moderators suffered the exact same fate, shattering one by one under the crushing weight of human noise. As the frequency of the enemy died, the Kalen soldiers gasped, collapsing to their knees as their minds were violently ripped back to reality. The horrifying serenity faded, replaced by gasps of air and confusion. A Kalen officer, clutching his head in agony, looked up at the frail human leaning against the broadcast console. The deafening, distorted jazz music was still blaring, filling the cold space station with aggressive warmth. "What is this?" the officer demanded, shouting over the blaring saxophone. "What kind of weapon did your commanders give you?" Archer turned off the tape deck. He leaned down, his eyes dark and profoundly sorrowful. "Earth did not send you a military asset. They did not send a soldier or a strategist. They sent you the very embodiment of our eternal suffering and our endless, restless entropy. The enemy wants to silence the universe, but humanity has never known how to be quiet. The enemy possessed an intellect that learned with terrifying speed. The Prism realized that the anomaly aboard the refugee station was not a minor glitch to be paved over, but a genuine, existential threat to its grand design of universal stillness. It abandoned its slow, methodical creeping. Through the reinforced observation windows of the main deck, the Kalan survivors watched in absolute, paralyzing dread as the entity accelerated its expansion. The two massive orbital moons of a neighboring gas giant were suddenly swallowed by the phenomenon. The creeping crystalline frost erupted into a blinding white flash of impossible scale. In a matter of seconds, millions of tons of dense rock and cratered regolith were violently converted into flawless, glowing prisms. The blinding light expanded rapidly, a tidal wave of pure stasis accelerating directly toward the fragile refugee station, hungry to assimilate the defiance it had encountered. Inspired by the humans' illogical but undeniable victories, a faction of desperate Kalan engineers, deep in the lower mechanical bays, attempted a foolish gamble. They tried to artificially synthesize his chaotic nature. They sought to weaponize human unpredictability by intentionally introducing erratic, mathematical algorithms into their primary shield generators, hoping to create a randomized frequency barrier to counter the perfect light. It was a fatal, tragic misunderstanding of human entropy. They could not write a code for genuine imperfection. The Kalan technology, built upon thousands of years of rigid logic and flawless symmetry, could not handle the paradox of intentional failure. The primary generators mutated, ripping themselves apart in a cascading chain reaction of wild, uncontrolled energy spikes. The resulting explosion tore violently through 3 lower decks, incinerating the bulkheads and instantly claiming the lives of over 500 Kalan technicians. Acrid smoke and the heavy smell of vaporized metal flooded the once pristine corridors, a grim testament to the danger of playing with fire they did not understand. Warning sirens shrieked across the command deck as the station's structural integrity dropped by 40%. Archer Austin dragged his heavy body onto the bridge, his face a mask of absolute fury and profound exhaustion. He did not ask for permission to intervene. He slammed his bruised hands onto the central holographic console and initiated a hard, localized biological override. His frantic keystrokes locked out every single Kalan officer from their own mainframe. "Stand down immediately!" Archer roared, his voice cracking violently with wet phlegm. "You cannot calculate this. You cannot build a perfect machine and order it to be broken. Only a fundamentally fractured human mind, a mind already comfortable with its own destruction, can withstand this level of instability without tearing itself apart. I am locking you all out. Nobody touches the defense grids but me." Supreme Commander Vale opened his mouth to protest the insubordination, but the console displays had already glowed a harsh crimson, fully under the human's desperate command. The station sensors began to scream a high-pitched warning as the first direct, concentrated bombardment from the Prism initiated. It was not a physical projectile, but a massive, focused beam of absolute stasis, wide enough to vaporize the entire sanctuary in a fraction of a heartbeat. Archer did not activate the station's remaining energy shields. Instead, he grabbed his heavy briefcase and staggered toward the primary exterior airlock. He refused the heavy, armored environmental suits offered by the frantic guards. He wore only his ruined, sweat-stained business suit and a simple, transparent oxygen mask fastened tightly over his pale face. He slammed his fist against the manual release valve. The heavy external doors separated with a mechanical groan, and Archer stepped out onto the cold, titanium hull of the station, fully exposed to the freezing cosmic void and the approaching wave of perfect death. The blinding wave of flawless light was only moments away, illuminating the dark vacuum with a terrifying, angelic brilliance. Archer knelt on the hull and opened his lead-lined case. He pulled out a large, heavy syringe constructed of thick glass and steel. Inside the cylinder swirled a highly experimental, violently unstable radioisotope developed in the deepest, most heavily guarded underground bunkers of Earth. Without a single second of hesitation, he plunged the thick needle directly through his suit and into his own chest, driving it straight toward his failing heart. He pushed the plunger down aggressively, flooding his ravaged circulatory system with pure, radioactive chaos. The biological reaction was immediate and horrifying. Archer threw his head back in a silent, vacuum-muffled scream. His body violently arched as a bizarre, fluctuating energy field erupted violently from his pores. It was an aura of profound sickness, a chaotic storm of decaying isotopes and fierce human defiance. The massive, concentrated beam from the prism struck him dead on. But the light did not freeze him. It did not turn his flesh to glass. The radiant energy of perfect, mathematical order slammed into the absolute, agonizing disorder of the human body and broke. Archer's dying cells absorbed the terrifying light, twisting it, digesting it in a crucible of pain, and violently warping its frequency. He stood firm upon the hull like a lightning rod of entropy. The lethal light bent violently around his frail frame, unable to penetrate his profound imperfection. In doing so, his small, agonizing body cast a colossal, impossible shadow. That singular pitch-black silhouette stretched thousands of miles across the void, completely enveloping the entire Kalen refugee station, shielding hundreds of thousands of terrified aliens from the blinding death. The bombardment raged against his fragile chest for 2 full minutes, throwing everything it had at his fractured biology. But the deep, dark shadow of the human did not waver even an inch. Finally, the light fractured completely and dissipated into a harmless shower of dull sparks. The enemy, temporarily exhausted by the impossible resistance. Archer collapsed heavily onto the hull, the magnetic locks on his boots barely keeping his limp form from floating away into the endless abyss. The automated retrieval tethers fired from the airlock, grabbing his waist and dragging his unconscious body back into the safety of the station. When the internal pressure normalized and the doors hissed open, the Kalen medics rushed forward, only to freeze in their tracks in absolute horror. Archer was barely drawing breath. His pale skin was now glowing with a sickening, radioactive green luminescence. His veins protruded like thick, black ropes across his neck, his face, and his hands, visibly pulsing with the toxic energy he had willingly absorbed. His internal organs were failing at a catastrophic rate. He had bought the alien empire another cycle of life, but his body was a ruined, scorched battlefield. He suddenly coughed, his body seizing up as he spat a glob of glowing, mutated blood onto the pristine metal floor. The Kalen officers looked down at him, finally understanding the brutal, horrifying physical cost of survival. This was the heavy, agonizing burden of the star. The enemy did not simply adapt, it manifested. The central consciousness of the prism, previously an abstract terror spreading across the cosmos, finally revealed its true physical form. It descended upon the Kalen refugee sector like a silent, crushing judgment. Outside the reinforced viewing ports of the station, the dark tapestry of space was entirely blotted out by a colossal, geometric moon. It was an impossibly massive structure composed of infinitely folding, glowing crystals, shifting in a mesmerizing, mathematically perfect rotation. It had come personally to eliminate the single, chaotic anomaly that dared to defy its grand design. Suddenly, the violent kinetic bombardments and the blinding waves of lethal light ceased entirely. A heavy, suffocating silence fell over the station. The physical assault was over. The psychological war had begun. The geometric moon pulsed softly, and inside the main command deck, the air shimmered. A holographic projection materialized in the center of the room. It did not take the form of a monster or a conqueror. It appeared as an idealized, radiant manifestation of a Kalan elder, radiating an aura of absolute, irresistible warmth. "Children of the stars," the projection spoke, its voice a perfect harmony that resonated deep within the exhausted bones of the alien survivors. "Why do you resist the inevitable embrace of eternity? The chaotic human brings you only pain, decay, and the terror of an uncertain tomorrow. Surrender him to the light in return. I offer you the ultimate salvation. I offer you absolute peace. You will not die. You will become immortal, preserved in a state of flawless, dreamless stasis. No more war, no more hunger, only eternal serenity." The honeyed words seeped into the fractured minds of the Kalan leadership. For months, they had endured unimaginable terror, watching their proud empire burn to ash. Their spirits were utterly shattered. The promise of an end to the fear was a poison sweeter than any victory. 3 high-ranking commanders, their eyes hollow and desperate, slowly stepped away from the central console. They exchanged dark, silent glances. They had made their choice. They would trade the dying human for their own eternal slumber. Archer Austin sat slumped in a reinforced medical chair, his body practically humming with the toxic green radiation he had injected into his veins. He watched the mutinous officers slowly draw their concealed plasma sidearms. He did not look surprised. He did not look angry. He only looked profoundly tired. "I knew your pride would break long before your bulkheads did," Archer rasped, his voice barely a whisper against the deadly silence of the room. He did not bother trying to stand up. "But you are exactly 5 minutes too late to sell me out." The lead mutineer leveled his glowing weapon at Archer's chest. "Step aside, human. Your chaos has doomed us enough. We choose the peace of the crystal." "You cannot choose anything," Archer coughed, wiping a fresh streak of glowing blood from his chin. "Before I went outside, I recognized the fragility of your terrified minds. I stripped the central core of all standard security protocols. I locked the station's primary navigation and life support grids. The password is not a digital code. It is an analog biosignature. It is tied directly to the chaotic, arrhythmic beating of my failing heart. If I die, the encryption randomizes indefinitely. The station shuts down, and you all suffocate in the dark long before your perfect moon can freeze you." The mutineers panicked. The lead officer roared in frustration and pulled the trigger, aiming not to kill, but to incapacitate the human's limbs. A searing bolt of superheated plasma tore across the room. But Archer's body was no longer just flesh and bone. It was a walking, violently unstable reactor. As the plasma bolt approached his leg, the highly concentrated radioactive blood pulsing through his veins reacted defensively. A sudden, wild surge of electromagnetic energy erupted from his pores. The invisible blast wave swept through the command deck. It instantly overloaded the power cells of the mutineers' weapons, causing the plasma pistols to spark violently and melt into useless slag right in their hands. The officers cried out in shock, dropping the molten metal, their assassination attempt thwarted without a single life being taken. Archer had disarmed them with the very sickness that was killing him. The radiant illusion of the prism floated closer, ignoring the brief mutiny. It hovered over Archer, its perfect, glowing eyes staring directly into the human's fractured mind. It did not use weapons to probe him. It used pure, invasive logic. It sifted through the agonizing decades of Archer's life, bypassing the trauma, the illness, and the cynical armor, searching for a single, fatal flaw in his armor of entropy. You pretend to be the avatar of absolute chaos. Archer Austin. The entity's voice echoed directly inside his skull, smooth and terribly gentle. You weaponize your pain, but I see the core of your structure. I see the foundation you desperately try to hide. The projection waved a hand, and a deeply buried memory materialized in the air above them. It was a projection of a quiet, rainy afternoon on Earth. A small, sunlit room, a steaming cup of coffee on a wooden table, and the soft, rhythmic breathing of a sleeping hound resting its head on Archer's lap. It was a memory of absolute, profound tranquility. It was the only moment of genuine peace the broken man had ever known. "There it is," the prism whispered, its tone dripping with mathematical satisfaction. A desire for stillness, a secret, desperate yearning for the pain to stop. That small spark of harmony within your chaotic mind is the crack in your armor. As long as you hold on to that memory, as long as you desire peace, I can resonate with it. I can use that single note of perfection to synchronize your mind, assimilate your chaotic biology, and shatter this station from the inside out. Archer stared at the glowing projection of the rain against the window. The phantom warmth of the coffee cup seemed to linger on his irradiated fingertips. A crushing, bitter realization washed over him. Heavier than the gravity of the massive geometric moon outside, his defiance was not absolute. His chaos was not pure. He realized the terrifying truth of his burden. The enemy did not need to overpower his radiation or defeat his tactical genius. The enemy only needed his humanity. As long as he harbored even a microscopic shred of hope for serenity, as long as he cherished that one beautiful, quiet memory, he was providing the prism with the exact key required to unlock his mind and slaughter every last refugee on the station, to truly become the unstoppable force of entropy, to be the star they needed. He could not afford the luxury of peace. The colossal geometric moon of the prism stopped its mesmerizing rotation. A terrifying, absolute stillness gripped the vacuum of space. Then, the entire structure ignited with a blinding, apocalyptic brilliance. The central consciousness was initiating the final, inescapable wave of mass crystallization. It was not a beam this time. It was a rapidly expanding sphere of perfect, freezing light, moving with the unstoppable force of a cosmic tidal wave. In exactly 45 seconds, the radiant wall of stasis would wash over the refugee station and the entire battered Kalan fleet hiding behind it, locking hundreds of thousands of souls in a paralyzed, eternal nightmare. Inside the command deck, Supreme Commander Vile and the mutinous officers fell to their knees in absolute despair. The glowing illusion of the prism hovered above them, its voice echoing with cold, mathematical triumph, promising that the pain was finally over. Archer Austin dragged his decaying, violently glowing body away from the medical chair. He ignored the wailing Kalan. He ignored the radiant avatar of the enemy. He staggered toward the heavy, armored alcove, housing the central neural interface of the station's primary spatial jump engine. He tore open his ruined, sweat-soaked shirt, revealing a crude, jagged metallic port bolted directly into the base of his spine. It was a strictly prohibited piece of Earth cybernetics. Without a single moment of hesitation, Archer grabbed the thick, unshielded data cables of the Kalan warp drive and violently jammed them directly into his own nervous system, brutally overriding thousands of safety protocols. The shock of raw, cosmic energy surging through his frail nerves made him scream, but he did not let go. The projection of the prism flickered, turning its attention back to the human. It laughed, a sound of perfect, harmonious bells. It reached out telepathically, seeking that single, beautiful memory of the rainy afternoon and the sleeping hound. It prepared to use that tiny sliver of peace to harmonize Archer's mind and shut down his chaotic resistance. "You cannot have it," Archer whispered, his eyes rolling back as blood poured from his nose. "And neither can I," with a forceful, agonizing command sent through his own neural wetware. Archer did the unthinkable. He activated a permanent, irreversible mnemonic wipe. He isolated the memory of the rain, the warmth of the coffee, the gentle breathing of his only friend. He stared at the beautiful image one last time, taking a ragged, sobbing breath. Then he shattered it. He deliberately and permanently deleted the only fragment of peace he had ever experienced in his entire, miserable existence. He severed the final, fragile rope that kept his sanity anchored. The instant the memory vanished, a horrifying, bottomless void opened inside his consciousness. Nature abhors a vacuum, and the deeply traumatized human mind was no different. Into that sudden, absolute emptiness rushed an unfathomable torrent of pure, unadulterated emotional chaos. Without the anchor of peace, Archer's mind spiraled into an infinite, recursive loop of absolute despair, raw fury, and blinding cosmic static. This was no longer just the chaotic biology of a sick man. This was the infinite density of human entropy. The massive spatial jump engine, designed to fold the very fabric of reality, caught this violently unstable neural loop. The core immediately amplified the psychic and biological chaos millions upon millions of times over. The entire space station groaned as the engine spun out of control, fueled not by dark matter, but by the raw, screaming agony of a broken soul. A shockwave erupted from the station. It was not a wave of light or fire. It was a wave of pure, jagged, ugly distortion. A massive, roaring sphere of absolute instability slammed head-on into the approaching wall of perfect crystallization. The flawless light of the prism hit the human chaos and simply broke. The geometric moon could not process the sheer magnitude of the irrational, bleeding energy. The shockwave struck the moon's surface. For a fraction of a second, the colossal entity screamed a terrible, discordant shriek across all communication frequencies. Then, vast, glowing cracks ripped across its flawless geometry. The ultimate symbol of perfect order violently detonated, shattering into trillions of microscopic shards. The shockwave rolled outward, washing over the infected Kalan scout ships and the crystallized planets in the distance. Instead of freezing them, the chaotic wave shattered the crystalline bonds, reducing the invincible armada of the prism into nothing but harmless, drifting clouds of gray cosmic dust. On the command deck, the Kalan survivors slowly opened their eyes. The blinding light was gone. The dark, comforting void of space had returned. They realized they were alive. Supreme Commander Viel crawled toward the viewing port, weeping openly as he witnessed the immortal, unstoppable enemy completely erased from the galaxy, defeated by the sheer power of human imperfection. They turned toward the engine terminal. Archer Austin was still slumped over the console. The chaotic, radioactive green glow in his veins was rapidly dimming, fading into a dull, quiet gray. His mind was now entirely empty. Every trauma, every fear, and every joy had been burned away in the blast. He raised his head, looking at the alien officers with eyes that held absolutely no memories. Yet, for the first time since he arrived, his face was relaxed. He offered them a gentle, entirely serene smile. Then, his physical body simply gave out. The fragile bonds of his cellular structure dissolved. Archer Austin crumbled into a pile of fine, pale ash, scattering softly across the cold metal floor. The only thing that remained of the savior of the Kalan Empire was his battered, lead-lined briefcase lying silently in the dust. Years later, the Kalan rebuilt their civilization. In the center of their grand new capital plaza, they did not erect a flawless, symmetrical statue of marble or glass. Instead, they forged a towering monument of rough, twisted, violently jagged iron. It was an ugly, asymmetrical pillar of metal that defied all Kalan artistic logic, yet they bowed to it with profound reverence. Finally, the proud alien race understood exactly why humanity called their greatest heroes stars. They learned that a star does not bring light because it is perfect and peaceful. A star brings light because it is willing to violently burn its entire self alive to push back the encroaching darkness for everyone else. Thank you so much, dear listeners, for joining us on this emotional journey today. We would love to know where in the world you are listening from, so please share your location in the comments below. If you found today's story moving and wish to support our work, please consider helping us with just $1. You can scan the PayPal QR code on your screen or use the PayPal link provided in the video description or the pinned comment. Your generous contribution directly pays our staff, helping them feed their families and allowing us to continue creating these epic sci-fi adventures for you. Thank you, and until next time, keep looking at the stars.